Okay, gonna share the screen.
All right.
And back to you, Evelyn. Thank you, everyone.
All right, just to recap, number one, beware of key dates. That includes, the date for the discretionary funding application, which is February 22nd. And if you're applying for capital funding, and you are only applying to the New York City Council, you have until March 24th of this month, of this year. And if you are applying to any of the borough presidents, in addition to the council, you have until February 24th to apply for funding. So let's move on to the next slide. Thank you, Corey. So number 2 is nonprofits should have all required documentation for eligibility in order and up to date. So those forms include having an active EIN number for your organization. You need to have all the required forms to be included with the application. That includes the authorization form, which also has been notarized, a conflict of interest form, the affiliation form, and the supplementary forms. This is important. Supplementary forms are sometimes, more than just the one that you have to fill out for the application. Certain council members require supplementary forms that are separate from the council requirement. And also the borough delegations often have supplementary forms requirements, and you have to identify which ones are the ones requesting that form, because it helps them make decisions about who get funded, and they are part of the requirements of getting the funding. In addition, you have to have your certification from the Attorney General's Charity Bureau, or if you are exempt, you are an exempt organization, such as some religious organizations. You also have that document in order, and you must have a clear record of agency evaluation. So if you're like a returning organization to the council and you have already contracted with the city, you must have a clear record in order to pass the vetting process at the council. Next slide, Corey. So number three is get familiar with the different types of expense funding and determine your eligibility. So this is important. A lot of organizations often only apply to their council members and are unaware that the council has different lines of funding, such as member designated initiatives that are part of the members' funding, but it's separate from their direct discretionary funding lines. There is also speaker funding. There is citywide initiatives, and there are borough-wide initiatives. So we have, borough delegations. We have initiatives that are citywide and that they, cater to those nonprofits that operate at the, at the city level, that operate within different districts. And so they are, the ones, usually there are large organizations, and they are often designated by a specific committee or by the council as a whole. We also have speaker funding. Speaker funding is designated by the speaker, and is usually at the request of a specific council member or a delegation or caucus. If we could move on to the next slide, Corey, thank you. So number 4, complete all pre-qualification requirements. So what does that mean? That means that all nonprofits applying to initiatives that contract with DCLA, they must be pre-qualified through the Cultural Development Fund. And those are requirements for organizations that apply for, Coalition Theaters of Color funding, CASAs and SUCASA, and they have to also be pre-qualified in order for the council to be able to allocate funding through those initiatives. Next slide, Corey.
Yeah, it's up.
I'm sorry, number 5.
Going back. There we go.
Okay, so know your status as a nonprofit for council purposes. So that means knowing the distinction between being a newly created organization and the new to the council organization. So if your organization has been created or incorporated within the last 2 years, fiscal years, you may not receive funding above $20,000 in total, and no more than 10,000 per council member. So you can get 2 allocations of, or 4, you know, the minimum this year is $5,000. You can get 4 allocations or 2 allocations of a total of $20,000 for, you know, if you were just, you know, founded or created in the last, you know, 2 years. If you have never received funding from the council or not in the last 3 fiscal years. So let's say you used to get funding from the council 5 years ago, or you never applied to the council for these purposes is considered the same. You will not receive funding in excess of $50,000 in total and no more than $25,000 per individual council member. There are some exceptions to that rule for the minimum. Some, you know, agencies may receive less than $5,000. Some niche attendance associations, if we have any in the room, public schools, community boards, they all can receive less than $5,000 minimum. Next slide, Corey. Number 6, don't submit incomplete applications. You know, oftentimes, you know, organizations are not ready. They complete the application, they send it in the hopes that they can troubleshoot, you know, along the way throughout the process. Not a good idea. So it creates a lot of delays in the process for you. Any changes, every time anything is changed, I'm sorry, anytime anything is changed in your application, let's say you have to resubmit an incomplete form, the form was not notarized, it was completely obviated. It takes a month at least for that process to go through, because any changes to that has to go through a transparency resolution process at the council. So they have to bring it forward like any other legislation on, you know, on the council floor, and they had to vote on it, and they had to approve it, and then it goes to the agency, and then it has to approve by the agency. So it takes quite some time for these changes to be reflected in the final list that, you know, the council member will receive, with the list of organizations and their status for the funding for that specific fiscal year, which creates a lot of confusion, because oftentimes organizations will say, well, but we already fixed that issue last month and we still see it pending in the system, and that's the reason why. So some of the things that, including incomplete additional forms that are often the reason why your application gets delayed in the process, is also applications that do not include a clear purpose of fund. A purpose of fund is what we call a POF, is, you know, literally, what are you going to use the funding for? What are you going to use the money for? So, you know, what it is for. Is it for operating expenses? Is it for a specific program? Is it for personnel, you know, to pay your staff? It has to be clear in the purpose of fund, because if it doesn't match what you ultimately want to get reimbursed for, you're gonna hit a snag at that late in the process. Also very important, any contact information for your organization has to be up to date. I know that some organizations, like, they have applied before in the system, and they just sort of like use the same, they recycle the same information, but any changes in phone numbers and, you know, changes in staff, titles or different personnel coming in, emails, all that is the information that the council member will use to get in contact with you. So if you have the wrong email there, if you have the wrong phone number, they will never get in touch with you to let you know that, perhaps your application is not clear because there are some issues and they will never get resolved. Next slide.
And just to address a comment, bullet number 4 was not on the screen for very long. At the end, I will put it back. Let me just write that down. Slide 4. Repeat. Gotcha. Okay, next slide. Slide number 7.
Yeah, so number 7, don't disregard the importance of building a relationship with your council member. Very important. Get to know your local council member early on in the process, even the year before you decide to submit an application with that council member for funding. Let them know what you are doing in their district, the impact of your organization within their specific district. Even when, you are a larger organization and you have, citywide programming and a citywide impact, you must, bring it to the local level, bring it to the granular level and let that council member know these are the schools where we operate in your districts. These are, the constituents of yours that we service, because that's ultimately what that council member wants to see when they sit down with you. Take that time to, know the staff, the council member staff, especially the budget director, you should know who that person is. Introduce the members and the member staff to your staff and to your volunteers, so that there is a line of communication also from people that support you and that would like to see the council member support you. And showcase your impact in the district, share the struggles that you have as an organization, looking to service a certain demographic, so that they understand why this funding is essential to the life of, this programming in their district. Next slide. So number 8, so now you submitted your application, it's complete, it's perfect. And then you think that, well, I'm just waiting for the money to come in. But that's not the whole story, right? That's not the whole picture. So we have the council process, and then we have the mayor's office process. And that will be the mayor's office of contract services that we call MOCs for short. You have to submit all the requirements with MOCs. That includes the capacity building training, the HHS accelerator, and also setting up your passport account. Ultimately, all the agencies will communicate with you and contract with you through the passport account. If you don't have that set up, you won't move along from getting awarded an allocation to being able to be reimbursed the money. Next slide, Corey.
Slide 9.
Slide 9, don't neglect tracking the progress of your application. So throughout the funding application process, any issues related to the council, MOCs, or in the case of capital applications, the OMB process, should be communicated to your organization by the council member that is awarding you that allocation. So you should be getting calls or emails from those offices letting you know whether you are clear or whether you have a pending status on that application. So council members on average have, hundreds of organizations that they allocate funding. Make sure that you know who to call, that you know the budget directors, that you know the staff at the council member's office, so you can call them and also ask about the status of your allocation if you haven't heard from them. And our last slide is number 10, Corey.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let me.
Don't hesitate to call us to help you achieve your organization's fiscal year 2023 funding goals. And, I have included here Corey's information, and I'll pass it on to him to talk a little bit more about what we do at HCQ Consulting. Thank you.
All right. First of all, let me put all these questions here so that we can review it. Some questions are going to be for Evelyn. Some questions are going to be for me. The last person whose question I have is from Shumaila. I'll work on Heather Godfrey's question in a moment. Okay, so let me go back to you guys. Share my screen. Boom. And Evelyn, if you could just admit the people in the room while I take over this, and then we'll go back and forth. All right, so Q&A. We're doing very well on time. We will have about 30 minutes for Q&A and end at 7:30. Let me start with some of the questions here that I can answer easily, and then I'll pass it on to Evelyn. Okay, let me start from the bottom. Let me see. Boom, do you need if you're applying? Okay, supplementary forms, initiative. Does the application process have a mentor helpline? No. The council member's office is the closest thing to a mentor helpline as it gets. So the reason why Evelyn Collado is so effective and experienced, because people like her, budget directors, were that lifeline to nonprofit organizations like yourself, and they would answer as many questions as they would have the bandwidth for. But imagine one budget director and hundreds of nonprofit organizations. It's not easy. Right now, if you have any questions about the process, soup to nuts, you can, and I'll share my contact information again. We can sit down, we can have a Zoom, and we can address your needs and then talk about what services, if any, do you need from HCQ. What's the best way to make appointments or speak to the council member? There was another question here, like, where do you find the information? So best way is Evelyn, if you could just find the city council website and dump it in there. City council members, the city council has a website where it has their office number and their general email. And sometimes they include the emails of staffers, chief of staff, deputy, scheduler, and so forth on the website. And sometimes you'll just have to go old school. They'll all have the general, info at district, whatever. But sometimes you could just go old school, call the person and say, hey, my name is Corey from XYZ nonprofit. I would love to set up a meeting. Can I speak to the scheduler? Can I set up a meeting with council member ABC? And, what's your email address? That's old school, but it works. You have to take into account that, we're in the COVID era. Some of the council members do not have their staff at the office. So you may have to literally leave a message and wait for a call back. But don't be surprised about that. Okay. All right. So let's go for some general. And Evelyn, you're on mute. Do you have the questions that were submitted? You have those?
Yes, I just want to add, for those that were asking about resources, I added to the chat the link for NYC nonprofits. In there, you will, get access to a wide range of useful information as you navigate that, being a nonprofit operating in New York City, including applying for funding with the New York City Council. In addition, if you go to the New York City Council website, there is a dedicated page with a heading budget, where you can find all the documents and information that you need in order to get acquainted with this process. It's not, it's not extremely user-friendly. It has a lot of, specific, jargon that might not be as accessible, but you should be getting acquainted with Schedule C for last fiscal year, which includes all the initiatives and all the funding that was allocated in the last city budget, and which organizations received that funding, and the eligibility requirements to be able to apply for that particular kind of funding. So that's that. And then they also have the policies and procedures document there that is also sort of a beginning to end description of the process and everything that you need to have in order to have a successful application in terms of the procedural process.
Okay. So let me do something. There were some questions that were submitted beforehand, and I just want to get to those real quick so we can knock it out and return to the rest of the questions. We have always asked if an application, should we separate the applications to the speaker, BLAC, and each council member, or should we do do a single application and check all of those boxes? Evelyn.
Yeah, that's a common question. A lot of organizations ask about this. The short answer is, if you have one program, if you have one big, flagship program, submit one application and just check everyone that you are looking for funding. All the council members that you're applying to, all citywide, speaker funding. But if your organization has several different programs and they are distinct from each other, and they are of, they are of different interests to different constituencies and council members, my advice is submit an application per program, and then you can tailor who you're going to apply to for that specific program, and so on with your other programs.
Okay, and I'm just dropping something here. You can also contact City Council Central staff directly and it's in the chat. All right, so I'm going to go back to the chat room in a moment. Let me just get through some of these questions. All right. Boom, boom, boom. Do you need to apply with the same program to the City Council and to the DCA?
I think that's the DCLA, and in order to apply for funding through DCLA, you have to be like an arts and culture organization. That's the first thing. And no, the process is different. You can apply for the council and DCLA, and you may only apply to council funding, but you do have to be pre-qualified with DCLA. So if you're gonna go through the process of getting certified by DCLA, by all means apply to DCLA and city council funding.
Okay, we're good there. When will the CAP grant portal open up?
Yes, that's a good question. For the CAP grants, go to the CAP grants portal, NYC Capital Grants, and just follow the instructions to log in, to register, and then you will, there is a process where you have to, submit a certain information. They get back to you, set up your account, and they will let you know, as the process moves, what are the important dates to keep in mind.
Okay. How do we find out if a supplementary form is required? Is there an organized list of forms for all council members?
So if, you know, the forms that are required are included in the application, you should complete all those. And then if you're applying to certain council member office, you should reach out to that council member and ask whether they have a supplementary form requirement. The same with the delegations.
Let me just add something real quick. Oh, wrong one. All right, I'm going to read this one out, and then I will put in the chat. The application for the Cultural Development Fund hasn't gone live at the DCLA's website yet. It's expected to be later than in previous cycles. I will type that in there. It's just taking me a second. Boom. Okay. Where can we find the forms for the different funding lines? Is it a part of the general application?
Yes, the application process includes all the information that you need to submit. It's all there.
Okay, here's a good one. Quick note, CAP grants went live this past December. Just a quick note. For initiative funding, what are eligible expenses?
Could you repeat that question?
For initiative funding, what are eligible expenses?
So initiative fundings, it depends on the initiative. When you apply to the through the application, you will see what are the initiatives that are available. You know, usually you have CASAs, Greener NYC, New York City Cleanup, and they have a description of what are the requirements, you know, of each initiative. You can also go to Schedule C, as I mentioned earlier. You can find that on the website. I will post the link to the Schedule C for last year. And there you can also get a description of each initiative and, you know, who is eligible, because some of them are very specific, and you need also to notice which are the agencies that you need to contract with, because they also have their own set of requirements. You know, if you contract with DCLA, DCLA has its requirements. You know, sometimes you have to contract with the sanitation department or Parks and Rec. So every initiative has specific requirements, and Schedule C will have that information.
Okay, I'm going to take this question to give you a break. What advice would you give an organization that has been providing services successfully for several years, but continue to receive the same funding, therefore continuously limiting who we could serve? It goes back to building the relationship with the council member. If you know you're great, your constituents know you're great, your mother knows she loves you, she knows you're great. But if the council member doesn't know you're great, and in this case we have 36 new council members, then you may get the same level of funding. That's the good news. The bad news could be you may not receive any funding at all, or just the minimum, because they don't have that relationship with you. So, you know, like Evelyn had said, you have to really, and there's going to be an op-ed coming out tomorrow where Evelyn and I wrote that, you know, it's a lot more for nonprofit organizations to go beyond the application phase, where you're courting the council member, and you want to let them know what you do, who you do it with in their district. Let them meet your staff. Some organizations have staff members that were former constituents. Like there's an organization, I Will Graduate, their executive director, the director, used to be a child and received those services. He grew up and he went to work for the organization. That is an amazing story to convey to the council member. So to that answer is, you almost have to become, you are an advocate, but now you have to advocate for yourself. You have to become a self-serving lobbyist for your organization and present your best foot forward to that council member. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to Evelyn so I can read some of the comments and add questions. What would you ask for a total amount, or would each application be for an amount you apply for? For example, say if you need $100,000, do you apply for that amount or do you do 33,000, and then each one gives you 33,000?
So the answer is, why are you requesting smaller amounts per, council member or delegation? So is it because you have different programming and you want, let's say, those $33,000 to go to one specific program, $33,000 to go to a different specific program? Like I mentioned before, so submit an application per program. So that way you will ask the amount that you need per program, and you will divide that total amount in between, those programs that you have. Now, if you have one single program, you are submitting one single application, and you want to apply for, let's say, operating expenses, you submit an application with one total dollar amount, and then when you talk to your specific council member, when you send that follow-up letter with your ask, that includes the application number, you tell the council member how much you're asking for from him or her. That's where you make that distinction. You want $30,000 from council member A, and you want $30,000 from council member B. You have to customize your follow-up letters and personalize it. This is my organization, would do this and that in your district, and we are asking for this much for this specific program.
Okay. Karen, when you get a chance, work on your question. I don't understand it too well. And then just put it back, maybe clean it up a bit. I'm not understanding. I'm going to go to another question. This one is interesting. Are veteran events a part of the funding allocation priority? And if Joe Bello's still in the room, let me know. But is that enough of a question, Evelyn, or do we need more?
I don't know if it's like, if organizations operating within the veteran services, environment. And yes, there is dedicated funding at the council for veteran services. So if you're a nonprofit working with veterans, of course, we want to hear from you. I still say we, I'm not at the council anymore. The council wants to hear from you and to hear about your impact and what is it that you're doing. And by all means, submit that application.
Okay. Let's see. All right. I think
I saw a question regarding a nonprofit that only works with volunteers, and that they saw some confusing information as to having paid staff. You still can submit an application for New York City Council funding. You expected that you still have operating costs, like rent and, utilities or supplies. You also have programming expenses. Those are the expenses directly related to being able to operate your program, to get it to the right, constituencies. So yes, so not having paid staff is not a limitation on, or a bar on applying to the New York City Council funding.
Evelyn, can you go into how the allocations work, that they're, reimbursements for expenses they should have funding for in their own operating budgets? Can you talk about that a little bit?
I'm not sure I follow, but let me see if I understood. So nonprofits do not get access to funding immediately. So when you apply to New York City Council funding, you should already have an operating budget, because it takes at least close to a year to get access to that funding, unless you are DCLA certified, and then you can get up to 85% of that funding upfront. But still, it's a lengthy process. It's a shorter process than being reimbursed at the end. But council funding is a lengthy process. You have to, after you complete all the processes that we mentioned today, meaning you are cleared by the council, you're cleared by MOCs, you set up your passport account, you submitted all your training and qualifications, then you have to submit a budget, then you have to, have a contract, finalized and bundled up, that gets sent to the controller's office. They have 30 days to approve that, and then you start submitting the invoices for reimbursement. So it's a very lengthy process, and you must have funding to operate in the meantime.
Okay, some new questions here. We answered the organization having volunteers. We answered that. Just to confirm, if there are supplemental forms needed for caucuses and council members, we need to reach out to those offices directly. There's no online portal or location online to find those additional requirements. Is that correct?
Correct. Now, that doesn't mean that some specific council members that have websites, dedicated websites. I remember one such council member was Helen Rosenthal. Helen Rosenthal, she had a website where you could go and find all the information that was required for applying to the council funding, including her supplementary form that was there. So, you know, some delegations have had that also through a link that, you know, we used to send out to the nonprofits, and they will like fill out the supplementary form. Now I don't, you know, but there is no central system where a nonprofit organization can go and find all the supplementary forms for specific council members. Remember, the supplementary forms for council members are a way for them to identify who are the local organizations that they want to ultimately fund and get to know them better. So that's an in-house sort of process that is completely separate from the New York City Council application process.
Okay. Is there a way to ensure your funding goes through DCLA rather than DYCD?
Correct. You have to be certified by the CDF. You have to make sure that you communicate to your council member that you want to receive your funding through DCLA. And so that when they make the allocation, they make it through the correct agency. Changing agencies on allocations that are already awarded is a very onerous process. It happens like twice during the fiscal year at the council, and you don't want to be there. You're already waiting too long for this funding to get to you. So make sure that you let your council member know that you are DCLA certified and that you want to contract with DCLA.
Okay. All right, let me take this question. Everybody pause the chat room for a second. So, because I'm still copying. How do we get past the gatekeepers for each council member in order to share with them the good that we're doing? Persistence. So back in the day, right? Like 2 years ago, back in the day, you could, I wouldn't say troll, but you could find council members at the city council chamber during their committee hearings, and their staff would be there. And sometimes you could just also go to their district office unannounced and say, hey, I am, you know, Jane, John, non-gender conforming Doe. I want to talk to your budget director, your scheduler. That's not so easy anymore. So you literally have to stay on top of emails and phone calls. I'm an organizer. So something that you can do, if you read on the council member's Twitter feed, I'm having a rally to defend the people's right, February 4th at 3 o'clock on this corner. And you happen to be free, show up. Hey, council member, want to talk to you real quick. And then they'll pass you on to a staffer and you can get the ball rolling. Like I said, determination. If you're determined to reach out and, you know, communicate with this council member, you will get it done. It won't be easy, but it's not impossible. All right, let me pass you. Okay.
There was a question prior. I believe someone asked about getting a program to New York City schools. I just want to say that the New York City Council offers initiative funding for CASAs, which are initiatives to offer after-school programming in schools in New York City. But if you have a program that you would like to add to the curriculum or you want to bring to a specific school, you would have to do that through the Department of Education. There is a separate process for doing that. So I would recommend that you get acquainted with, you go to the website for the Department of Education and get acquainted with the process of getting, a specific, curriculum or programming integrated within, the school curricula.
All right, let me throw this one. We have about 4 minutes for Q&A as it relates to the application process. I'll stay behind for anything else. I'm not seeing the DCLA certification online. Can you clarify the process?
Yes, so it's not there yet, the application, but you should go and get acquainted with the registration process, get acquainted with all the requirements and create, I believe you have to create some sort of account, but the actual application, I do not believe is up yet. It's getting later and later in the fiscal year for them to put up the application online.
Okay, still not clear. Okay, I'm still not clear if we are applying for discretionary and an initiative. Do we need to submit separate applications?
You can apply for all different lines of funding through the same application.
Okay, let me take care of this one so I can give you a break. Does hiring a lobbyist help? The answer is yes. I am a lobbyist. But it really comes down to, can you afford a lobbyist, even at, a decent fee? And you have to make that decision because it's an investment. What a lobbyist does is they, the years of experience, the know-how, the inner workings of government, and the relationships that have been built over time helps represent the client and put the client in the best light possible. It's like a lobbyist is like the ultimate, and I'm going to use my gender, wingman, where you got a wingman with you. They're going to hype you up. They're going to take it out for the team. They're going to talk to in my case, I like girls, they're going to talk to the girl for you. And then, and say, yeah, my guy's right here. That's the equivalent, very watered down, simple explanation of a lobbyist. They go out there and they do the work for you, make the connections, and really set you aside. Well, you have to consider, we had like 70 something people, organizations on this call. If all organizations, you're all doing great work, like literally God's work. I started out a nonprofit where we didn't have any supplies. We had to take paper from our home, paper from our day job, pens and so forth, just to have a supply closet. So the struggle is real. And, oh God, I was going somewhere with this. Oh yeah, all things equal. You're all great organizations. You're all busting your hump. You're working past 40 hours, but so are other organizations. So if all things are equal, when you present that application to the council member, they see great work, great work. What makes you stand out? And there are two things that you can do to stand out. What Evelyn said, make sure to establish a real relationship with that council member and their staff. Let them know the great work you're doing. Pass the paper. I could read resumes and intro letters all day long, and it's the same format. We do great work with this set of people. We've helped this many, and please fund us. But that it's, you see the same thing over and over again. But when they put a face to that name, when they see a video, when they meet some of the children or constituents that you help out, that makes you stand out. So that's one. And you could do that yourself. You don't need a lobbyist for that. But, there was another case where someone said, well, I've received the same funding forever. I don't know if I'm going to get the same funding. A lobbyist could help. But that's a personal decision, like religion. If you think that's what you need, amen. All right. Okay. And we are out of time. Whew.